The air stood still on the Savuti Plains as Daniel Foster stepped from the dusty Land Rover, his heart pounding like a tribal drum against his ribs. 5 years had passed since he'd last walked these golden grasslands. 5 long years since he'd looked into the amber eyes of Tao, the lion he had raised from a sickly 3-week-old cub into a magnificent apex predator before releasing him back to the wild. The same lion that wildlife officials now wanted to put down after a series of clashes with local livestock. "You're insane, Foster," muttered Hendrik, the grim-faced park ranger who had reluctantly driven him to this remote corner of the Botswana reserve. "That lion hasn't seen you in years. He's fully wild now. He'll tear you apart before you can blink." Daniel didn't respond, his eyes scanning the horizon where the morning sun cast long shadows across the acacia-dotted landscape. The tracking collar data had placed Tao's pride nearby, but lions were notoriously mobile, capable of traveling miles in a single night. Still, something deeper than science told Daniel that Tao was near, an intuition born from the thousands of hours they had once spent together. "I raised him from before his eyes were open," Daniel finally said, his American accent a contrast to Hendrik's clipped South African tones. "I slept beside him every night for 2 years. I was there for his first steps, his first meet, his first roar. And then you abandoned him here," Hendrik countered, checking his rifle nervously. "Nature has a way of erasing those memories, replacing them with instinct. He's not your pet, Foster. He's a 400-pound predator with a pride to defend." The words stung, but Daniel couldn't deny their truth. After rehabilitating dozens of orphaned animals throughout his career as a conservationist, he knew better than most how quickly the wild reclaimed its own. But Tao had been different. Their connection seemed to transcend the usual boundaries between human and animal. At least, that's what he needed to believe if there was any hope of saving the lion's life. 2 weeks earlier, while lecturing at a conservation symposium in Seattle, Daniel had received the call that changed everything. Tao, identified by his distinctive collar and facial markings, had killed 3 cattle after a prolonged drought pushed his pride beyond the reserve's boundaries. The local authorities, under pressure from ranchers, had issued a destruction order. Only Daniel's frantic calls to former colleagues and a hastily arranged flight to Botswana had temporarily stayed the execution. Now, standing in the scorching African heat with sweat already soaking through his khaki shirt, Daniel had 72 hours. 72 hours to prove Tao could be safely relocated deeper into the reserve, away from the temptation of easy livestock prey. 72 hours to reconnect with an animal that had every evolutionary reason to see him as nothing more than another meal. "I'll wait in the vehicle," Hendrik said, breaking the tense silence. "Radio if you need extraction. Though by the time I reach you with tranquilizers, it'll likely be too late." Daniel nodded absently, his focus entirely on the familiar tracks he'd spotted in the dusty earth. Large paw prints heading toward a nearby watering hole, partially obscured by tall grass. Taking a deep breath, he began walking deliberately, making enough noise to announce his presence without appearing threatening. The watering hole came into view, a shimmering oasis in the baking savanna. And there, lounging in the patchy shade of an acacia tree, was a magnificent male lion with a rich amber mane tinged with black streaks. Unmistakably Tao. Beside him lay 3 lionesses, their sleek bodies rising and falling with each relaxed breath, while 2 adolescent cubs played nearby, batting at each other with soft paws. Daniel's breath caught. This was Tao's family, his pride, his reason for defending territory so fiercely. The lion's ears flicked forward at Daniel's approach, his massive head rising with sudden alertness. The lionesses, too, sensed the human, their bodies tensing as they rose to crouching positions, ready to protect their young. "Hey, old friend," Daniel said softly, using the same gentle tone from their years together. "It's been a while." Dao's amber eyes locked onto Daniel's, and for a heart-stopping moment there was no recognition in them. Only the cold calculation of a predator assessing danger. The lionesses began to fan out, instinctively moving to flank what they perceived as a threat. Daniel remained perfectly still, fighting every instinct to retreat. "It's me, Dao," he continued, keeping his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You remember?" The lion rose to his feet with fluid grace, muscles rippling beneath his tawny coat. At full height, he stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder, his massive head held high as he took a deliberate step forward. The distance closed to 30 feet, then 20. In the Land Rover, Hendrik raised his rifle, his finger hovering near the trigger. Through the open window, he called urgently, "Foster, back away slowly now." But Daniel remained rooted, his eyes never leaving Dao's. At 15 feet, close enough for the lion to cover in a single bound, Dao stopped, his nostrils flaring as he took in Daniel's scent on the breeze. "You know me," Daniel whispered. "Deep down, you remember." What happened next would later be described by Hendrik as the most incredible thing he'd witnessed in 23 years as a ranger. Dao lowered his head slightly and made a soft chuffing sound, a non-threatening vocalization big cats use to greet those they consider familiar. Then, with deliberate slowness, the lion closed the remaining distance. Daniel stayed motionless, his heart thundering as 400 pounds of apex predator approached close enough for him to feel the warmth of its breath. Dao circled him once, twice, his massive body brushing against Daniel's legs. Then, in a gesture that defied everything known about wild lion behavior, Dao pressed his head against Daniel's side, a movement unmistakably similar to how he'd greeted Daniel as a cub. "That's it," Daniel breathed, tears welling as he cautiously raised a hand to touch the lion's mane. "You do remember." For several minutes, the world seemed to fade as Daniel carefully ran his hands through Dao's magnificent mane, reacquainting himself with its texture and scent. The lion's eyes, amber pools flecked with gold, held steady contact with Daniel's, conveying a depth of recognition that challenged conventional understanding of animal cognition. "Impossible," Hendrik whispered from the vehicle, his rifle now lowered but within reach. "In all my years, I've never." The spell broke as the lionesses approached, their cautious curiosity overcoming initial wariness. Daniel tensed slightly as the largest female, likely Dao's primary mate, stepped forward with deliberate steps. Unlike Dao, she had no history with humans. To her, Daniel was an intruder, a potential threat to her cubs who watched intently from the acacia's shadow. "Easy," Daniel murmured, as much to himself as to Dao. "Easy now." What happened next demonstrated Dao's extraordinary influence over his pride. As the lioness came within striking distance, her muscles coiled. Dao stepped smoothly between them. No aggression, no dramatic confrontation, just a calm, deliberate movement that established a clear boundary. The lioness hesitated, then backed away, respecting her mate's inexplicable decision. "Good boy," Daniel whispered, emotion thick in his voice. "Still looking out for me." In the hours that followed, Daniel experienced something few humans ever do. Acceptance on the periphery of a wild lion pride. Seated on the ground at a respectful distance, he observed as the lions went about their afternoon routine. The cubs, initially shy, grew bolder under their mother's watchful eye, occasionally approaching within several yards before darting away in a game of half curiosity, half caution. Dao moved between his family and Daniel, a bridge between worlds that should never have connected. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows, Daniel reluctantly acknowledged he needed to return to camp before dark. Approaching predators in daylight was risky enough. Doing so at night would be suicidal. Regardless of his history, "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. Rising slowly, "We'll figure this out together." The drive back was filled with Hendrik's astonished questions. "The scientific community will never believe this without documentation," the ranger insisted. "We should bring cameras tomorrow." Daniel shook his head. "No cameras. No audience. What happened today already pushed the boundaries. Adding variables could change everything." "Then what's your plan?" "The destruction order hasn't been rescinded. You've proven he remembers you." "Remarkable. But it doesn't solve the problem of livestock predation." It was the question that had haunted Daniel all afternoon. Recognition was one thing, a miracle in itself, but it didn't address the fundamental issue. Tao was a wild predator with a pride to feed. The drought had pushed game away, and cattle beyond the boundary represented an easier meal. "I need to convince the authorities to relocate the entire pride deeper into the reserve," Daniel said. "Away from the boundaries, near the central watering holes where game is still plentiful." Hendrik laughed without humor. "With what resources?" "Translocation requires helicopters, veterinary teams, tranquilizers, transport. Thousands of dollars the reserve doesn't have." "I have connections," Daniel replied, determination hardening his voice. "Conservation donors, wildlife funds. If I can document the bond with Tao, prove this pride is worth saving, you'd be putting your life at risk again. And on camera this time." Daniel looked out at the passing landscape. The savanna burnished with sunset light. Some things are worth the risk. Back at the research camp, a collection of simple cabins on the reserve's eastern edge, an unexpected visitor waited. Dr. Nala Mbeke, Regional Director of Wildlife Conservation, the official whose signature could rescind the destruction order, sat on the cabin's porch, her expression unreadable as the Land Rover pulled up. "Dr. Foster," she greeted him, rising. "I came as soon as I heard you were making unauthorized excursions. I should have known you'd ignore proper channels." Daniel had known Nala since their graduate school days. Their professional relationship was complicated. His hands-on rehabilitation methods often clashed with her strict non-intervention policies. "Nala," he acknowledged with a nod, "this isn't about protocols. It's about saving a unique animal that deserves better than execution for following instinct." Her eyebrow arched skeptically. "Instincts that are threatening the livelihoods of local communities. Communities whose cooperation we need for any conservation to succeed." Inside the sparse cabin, Daniel shared what had happened at the watering hole, describing Tao's recognition and the pride's extraordinary tolerance. Nala listened with professional skepticism tempered by years of respect for Daniel's work. "Even if what you're describing is accurate," she said carefully, "it doesn't change the fundamental problem. This pride has developed a taste for livestock. Relocated or not, they're likely to seek easy prey again. Not if they're moved far enough away with adequate natural prey," Daniel countered. "The drought is the real problem. It's pushed prey species from their territory." Nala sighed, removing her glasses. "You're asking me to allocate significant resources based on a belief that a personal bond can override years of established behavior. I'm asking you to witness it yourself," Daniel said quietly. "Come with us tomorrow. See it firsthand. Then decide." The proposition hung in the air. A challenge that appealed to the scientist in Nala even as the administrator catalogued the regulations it would violate. Finally, curiosity won. "Dawn," she said decisively. "We go at dawn. And I observe from the vehicle. If, and this is a significant if, what you describe is accurate, we can discuss alternatives." That night, as wilderness sounds filtered through the screened windows. Daniel reviewed everything he knew about Dao's history. The lion had been orphaned when poachers killed his mother. Found nearly dead from dehydration. Against all odds, Daniel had rehabilitated him, teaching the growing cub to hunt, to navigate social interactions, and eventually to survive independently before release at age 3. For 2 years after, Daniel had monitored Dao's progress through tracking data as the young male established himself, eventually challenging an aging lion to take control of a small pride. It had been a conservation success story, until the drought began. As dawn broke, painting the landscape in gold and amber, 3 figures climbed into the Land Rover. Daniel, Hendrik, and an apprehensive Dr. Mbeke. The plan was simple but fraught. Return to the watering hole, hope the pride was still nearby, and demonstrate the unique bond. The morning air carried the scent of wild sage as they approached. To Daniel's dismay, the area appeared deserted. No lions lounged in the dappled shade. No cubs played in the grass. Your miracle bond seems to have wandered off, Dr. Mbeke observed dryly. Checking her watch. We can give it another hour. But then I need to return. The ranchers expect my decision this afternoon. Daniel scanned the horizon, a knot in his stomach. Losing Dao now could mean losing any chance to save him. Hendrik was already consulting the GPS. The caller signal is active. They've moved northeast, about 3 kilometers, likely following an impala herd. Relief washed over Daniel. Can we reach them? Hendrik hesitated. No established track. We'd need to go cross-country through rough terrain. The vehicle might not make it. Then we go as far as we can and continue on foot, Daniel insisted. Turning to Dr. Mbeke. Nala, please, just a little farther. The director's professional skepticism warred with scientific curiosity. Finally, she nodded. 1 hour. Not a minute more. The Land Rover lurched over the uneven savanna. After 20 jarring minutes, Hendrik stopped at a rocky outcropping. From here, we continue on foot. The signal shows they're just beyond that rise. Possibly hunting. Dr. Mbeki's expression tightened. Approaching lions during a hunt violates every safety protocol. We'll maintain a safe distance, Daniel assured her. Already moving forward. If they're focused on prey, they likely won't register us. The group crested the rise cautiously, dropping into a crouch. In the valley below, Dao's pride had cornered impala against boulders. Lionesses formed a semicircle, while Dao lay in wait at the narrowest escape route. A classic ambush. Textbook hunting behavior, Dr. Mbeke whispered. Professional interest overriding concern. Perfectly coordinated. As they watched, the lead lioness sprang forward, triggering panic. The herd scattered. A young impala bounded directly toward Dao. The lion exploded from hiding with breathtaking speed, closing the distance and bringing down the impala with a powerful leap. Efficient kill, Hendrik commented. Clean neck bite, minimal suffering. What happened next caught even Daniel by surprise. Instead of feeding first, Dao stood over his kill and made a distinctive roaring call. The lionesses approached with the cubs. Dao stepped back, allowing the cubs first access to the freshest meat. That's unusual, Dr. Mbeke noted. Her interest clearly piqued. Most dominant males eat first, sometimes consuming 20 kilos before allowing the pride to feed. He's always been different, Daniel said softly. Even as a cub, he showed unusual social awareness. As the pride fed, Daniel slowly stood, making his presence known. The decision was risky. Predators are most defensive during feeding. But he needed Nala to witness the bond. Foster, Hendrik hissed. Get down. This is madness. But Daniel continued his careful approach, maintaining eye contact with Dao, who had raised his massive head. The lionesses went on alert, positioning themselves between the threat and their cubs. Dao, Daniel called softly. It's me, buddy. The moment seemed suspended in time. A human standing exposed before Africa's most formidable predator family. Armed only with trust, Dr. Mbeke reached instinctively for Hendrik's rifle. But the ranger shook his head. Any sudden movement could trigger a response. Dao left the kill site, moving with purposeful strides toward Daniel. When he reached Daniel, he performed the same greeting. A gentle head press followed by a deep, rumbling sound. Oh my God, Dr. Mbeke breathed, her skepticism crumbling. Emboldened, Daniel knelt beside Dao, placing a hand on his mane. Then, looking directly at Dr. Mbeke, he did something that made her gasp. He turned his back to the pride and walked several paces away, making himself completely vulnerable. Rather than triggering an attack, this act of trust prompted Dao to follow, staying close like a massive shadow. More remarkably, after a moment's hesitation, 2 lionesses allowed their cubs to approach as well, a tableau that defied conventional wildlife behavior. In 15 years of wildlife management, I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Mbeke admitted, carefully joining Daniel at a marginally safe distance. It's as if they've accepted you. Not accepted, Daniel corrected gently. They recognize me as something different, but not threatening. There's a distinction. For the next 30 minutes, Dr. Mbeke witnessed interactions that challenged the boundaries of wildlife science. A pride of wild lions tolerating human presence without aggression, and a dominant male demonstrating clear recognition and protective behavior. As they returned to the Land Rover, the decision had become complex. The drive back was filled with discussion on conservation ethics, animal cognition, and human responsibility. The relocation could work, Dr. Mbeke finally conceded as camp came into view. But it requires significant resources and a complete rethinking of our management approach for this pride. What alternatives do we have? Daniel challenged. Destroying an animal like Dao, one that's demonstrated exceptional cognitive abilities, would be a tremendous loss to our understanding. 3 days later, at dawn, a convoy assembled at camp. Wildlife veterinarians checked tranquilizer dosages. Transport experts reviewed routes to the new release site, a prey-rich area deep within the reserve, far from boundaries. The operation was unprecedented, rather than standard helicopter darting, which often separated pride members. Daniel worked with the veterinary team to approach on foot, a technique made possible only by his unique relationship with Dao. One by one, the lions were safely tranquilized, their vitals monitored as they were transported. Daniel rode with Dao, a steady hand on the sedated lion's flank. By mid-afternoon, the pride was relocated. As tranquilizers wore off and the lions regained consciousness, the human team retreated to observe. What now? Dr. Mbeke asked, watching through binoculars as Dao groggily rose to his feet. Will they stay? The prey density should keep them here, Daniel replied. But we'll monitor closely. The callers will alert us if they approach boundaries. In the months that followed, the relocation proved more successful than Daniel had dared hope. The pride established a stable territory. Their hunting focused entirely on natural prey. Cattle predation ceased completely, allowing the reserve to rebuild relationships with local communities. Daniel extended his sabbatical, establishing a small research outpost near the pride's territory. Twice weekly he would observe from a distance, documenting behavior for a groundbreaking study on lion cognition. Occasionally, when conditions were right, Dao would approach Daniel's vehicle, maintaining the connection that had saved his life. Always with strict protocols, never forced, respecting his fundamental wildness. 6 months after relocation, Daniel hosted a small group of international wildlife officials, including Dr. Mbeke, as they observed the thriving pride from a blind. He explained the delicate balance. The goal was never domestication or friendship as we understand it, he told them. Watching Dao lead his pride through evening hunting routines. The goal was understanding. Recognizing that these animals have cognitive and emotional capacities we're only beginning to comprehend. What happens when you return to America? An official asked. Will this bond fade? Daniel watched as Dao paused on a rise. His profile silhouetted against the setting sun. Some connections transcend regular contact, he replied. But more importantly, Dao doesn't need me anymore. He never really did. He's exactly where he belongs. Wild and free, but perhaps carrying some memory of kindness that defies our understanding. As if hearing, the lion turned toward the blind, his amber eyes seeming to find Daniel's across the distance. For a moment, two worlds connected through a gaze. One human, one wild, both part of the same complex ecosystem where boundaries sometimes blur in extraordinary ways. The true conservation victory, Daniel concluded softly, isn't that a lion remembers a man, but that a man remembers what we owe these animals. The space to be wild, the resources to survive, and the respect to let them live according to their nature. Everything else is just a gift we're privileged to receive.